Welcome back. You know, in the previous lecture we talked a lot about the state. When we were defining international law, we said it's the law that regulates interactions between states. And we went on to talk about states in the context of roughly what they were. We talked about the declining importance of the state, the declining role of the state in world affairs, but we never really defined state. You know, definitions are very important in the law. Every statute will start with a definitional section. When you go look up a statute, you'll see the first thing in there will be definitions. When you write a legal brief for a judge, and the judge will want to know what are the exact meaning of the terms that you're using, the legal terms that you're using. So precision through definition is very important in the law. So too with a state. Now, we shortcutted it in the previous lecture simply by saying a state represents is the same thing as a country. A state is a nation. But you probably have realized that you don't have a definition for that either. So what is a state? Well, in this lecture we're going to talk about what are the elements of a state. We're going to talk about statehood, and finally we'll talk about this notion of sovereignty, which is something that we brought up again in the previous lecture. So let's start with that first question. What is it that is needed in order to be a state? In order to be considered a state, there must be four elements present. There must be four elements present. Now these are referenced in your lecture notes, so go look at those and we'll go over this. The first element is that a state must have a population. There must be a group. A state must have a population. A territory that is uninhabited can't be a state. There must be a population. And there must be a territory. There must be some defined piece of geography that can be considered territory. So, population, inhabiting a territory, those are our first two elements of a state. The third element is a government. A state, in order to be a state, must have a functioning government. The government is functioning when it is able to exert control over the population living within the territory. And the fourth element of statehood is that a state must be capable of entering into relationships with other states, foreign relations. So those are the four elements of a state: a population, a territory, a government, and the capability of entering into foreign relations. Now, this last one, capable of entering into foreign relations, that's going to be dependent on something. That's going to be dependent on recognition by other states of your particular state. So recognition is how we know that a state is capable of entering into foreign relations with other nations. There must be recognition by those other nations. Now, it doesn't have to be unanimous recognition. It doesn't have to be a majority recognition. Really, recognition by a minority of other states could validate your statehood status. Now, other states have no duty to recognize a new state. There's no duty or obligation upon a state to recognize other states. And in fact, states have the ability to recognize not the pre-existing government, but states can also recognize belligerent groups within the state that are attempting to gain control. So if there was a war going on in one particular region, well, we can choose to recognize the current government of that region as the state, or we could, if we wanted to, back one of the other parties battling for dominance in that region and consider them to be the state. In the war in Iraq, when the U.S. led an invasion of Iraq in an attempt to change its recognition from Saddam Hussein's government to a new government installed by the United States and recognize that as the legitimate government of Iraq. So recognition of a state is vital. Now, the status as a state can change over time. Circumstances can change what a state is and whether a state is still a state or not. There's a couple of terms here. Well, first of all, I'll talk about the term called succession. And succession occurs when one state takes over another state's territory. When a state expands and acquires another state, then that other state may fall within the umbrella of the first state. We call this succession. Now this type of event happened all the time in history. Happens much less often nowadays. It's not a common event at all. Instead, what we often find today is the opposite of succession, and that is secession. And secession is the breakup of a state. Secession is the breaking apart of a state. And we have certainly seen that to a large extent over the last 2 decades. Beginning in the 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, we saw it, well, look at Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a state. Yugoslavia is now broken into multiple other states. That's the process called secession.